Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending this afternoon's webinar. I'd like to thank everybody for being flexible with time and being willing to reschedule to today. With that, I will turn it over to Lou Barani from AIG. Thank you, Lou.
Good morning, and thanks for your time this morning. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about active shooter, how to recognize and respond to the threat, some things you have to consider, and some actions that you can take to get ready for it, to prepare for it, and to react to it. So we're going to talk about the active shooter framework. We're going to talk about events and numbers, awareness, training, individual planning and response. We're also going to touch on organizational planning and response, the Safety Act, and then stop the bleed. Okay, now active shooter versus mass shooting. There's a distinction here that's pretty important. Since 2000, there have been about 254 active shooter events in the United States. And those are shooting events that have been categorized by the FBI as an active shooter event. However, there's also a category called mass shootings. And that's where 4 or more people are killed by a gunshot, by a firearm. And just in 2018 alone, there were 282 of those. So now that takes into account gang violence and everything else, but it also takes in domestic violence and random shootings. So there's a higher likelihood that you'll be involved in a mass shooting than an active shooter event, unless it's categorized as that. Okay, active shooter, the FBI calls it an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people. Homeland Security is a little bit different. They describe it as actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined populated space. And then mass shootings, which we just spoke about, the FBI has the criteria for mass murder and casualty thresholds as 4 fatalities by firearms, and Congressional Research Services has the same information. These numbers are a little bit dated because these events are happening quite a bit, but when I pulled this up, there were 250 occurred between 2015 and 2017, and it's just increasing. I mean, the numbers are staggering. And this slide talks about the active shooter events in the United States, and you can see for some reason a lot of it is taken in from the Midwest to the East. So, something to think about if you're located in those areas. It's not going down, it's going up. They're expecting more and more of these to happen. It's a tough threat to mitigate, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The transaction, 661 killed. Out of the 220 events, 661 killed, 825 wounded. Excuse me. The idea is to be as prepared as possible. And organizationally, you really have to think about an active shooter event in terms of over a year, because you have to think about the times it'll take you to prepare your people for this. And then if the event happens, what to do immediately afterwards, short term and then long term, all the way think about this all the way to a year out for the memorial. I'm sorry about this. It's not moving over, but a person can be anyone with a nexus to the work environment, a current or former employee, and includes violence, physical intimidation, aggression. People don't typically snap, but display indicators of potential violent behavior over time. These 2 last bullet points are really important, because taking a life is a profound act, and people just don't do this overnight. And we'll go over this in a later slide, but it takes a while for a person to get to the point where he says, I'm going to kill somebody. And it's not that hard to recognize the behaviors. And if they're recognized early enough, they can be managed and treated. We have to create a culture that doesn't say, I can't say anything about my friend Bob because he's having a rough time. I just don't want him get in trouble. But if he's displaying violent behaviors, if he's losing his patience, if he's posting information on social media that he's talking about guns and getting revenge or that he's mad, it's better to confront the situation at that point and get him help than waiting for him to snap to get to the point where he says, okay, I'm going to take a life and plan for it, and then it happens. There are different phases. There's the initiation, the first shots in the attack, which is confusion, orienting to the crisis, and then figuring out what you're going to do, the evacuation, the law enforcement arrival. When they arrive, they're not going to be able to help people that are injured. The process and the procedure is to go through the site, clear it, and up to the point where they neutralize the active shooter. So it's pretty important to get to a point where you can become self-sufficient. The law enforcement entry, they do the tactics, as I said, they bypass casualties, and then they secure the site. They establish command posts. And here's the important thing. It becomes an immediate crime scene. So whatever business you have going on there, it's not going to happen until the crime scene is resolved. And local ones that tend to take a shorter amount of time than a federal one. So if the FBI declares this an active shooter event, you'll have federal scrutiny, you'll have an FBI crime scene, and it'll take over. So you have to think through several things. The first one is, how am I going to care for the people who have been hurt, who have been injured, and who have been traumatized? And second is, how am I going to get my organization back operational? These events just don't happen with firearms. They happen with knives and cars. They happen with axes, gunshots, bombs, suicide bombers. It's a pretty open avenue of attack, and basically what kind of weapon you have access to. And they don't take long at all. The Fort Lauderdale airport was 70 to 80 seconds. Sandy Hook was 5 minutes. Fort Hood was 10. San Bernardino was 2 to 3. And then the London car knife attack was less than 5 minutes. The important thing is one person can make a difference. One person speaking up and saying, I don't like the way this person has been acting. He's been strange. He's been fighting with his wife. He's been fighting with his parishioners. He's been fighting with his friends, and he's been talking about threats and making threats on social media. One person can make a difference to stop something like this. If you stop it at the point where you take the person's mind off that profound act of taking a life, it'll save lives down the road, and it'll help him out too, or her. So for individual planning and response, preparation. Pay attention to training provided by your employer. The most important training you could get is run, hide, fight. It's very easy to remember. It's very easy when something traumatic happens, you lose gross motor skills, you begin to panic. The way I describe it is your mind is a Rolodex. And if you get run, hide, fight, or active shooter training, you get a card, you put the training out, and you put it in your Rolodex. When the event happens, your mind is going, uh-oh, what is this? What is this? So you go through the Rolodex, you find that card, okay, active shooter, this is an active shooter event I'm involved in, run, hide, fight, okay, I got to go run, hide, fight. That's how it works. If you don't get the training, if you don't get the reinforcement, if you don't talk about it and think about what you're going to do, in all likelihood, you're going to panic, and it'll make survival a little bit harder. Be aware of your environment and any possible dangers. Take note of nearest exits. If you're in an office and you can stay there and secure the door, do it. Attempt to take the active shooter down as a last resort. That's why they say run, hide, fight. And then listen to and follow law enforcement direction when they arrive. An important part of this is to coordinate with law enforcement before the event happens. Have them come down. Have them take a look at your church. Have them look at your office building. let them explain what they'll do and what they expect from you. Because one of the things they'll tell you to do, if you're hiding in an office, they don't want to go in there. They don't want to take the time if the active shooter is not in there. So they'll put up a code. They'll create a code or develop a code with you. You know, if you're in an office in an active shooter event, slip a yellow piece of paper under the door so the police officer, when he's walking by, can see it, and he'll know that it's secure and it's people that are safe. So those are important things to think about. You really have to think this through in a scenario situation. What you do before, what you do during it, where are my exits, how do I go out, how do I call, you know. One thing, if it's a person that is part of the congregation or part of the office, they'll know where people go to muster if there's a firearm. So in an active shooter situation, I would not go to a muster point because that person may be waiting there. So there are different things to talk about and think through, and different scenarios to work through so that you give everybody the greatest chance of survival. So back to preparation. When an active shooter is in your vicinity, you run, get out. Don't take your phone. Don't take your shoes if you have them off. Just get out. The next thing is to hide. You know, best place is a secure office with no windows. Blockade the door as much as you can. Do as much as you can to discourage the person from coming in, the active shooter coming in. And then as a last resort, you fight. I did a terrorism survey at Old Faithful out in Yellowstone National Park. And we were talking about active shooter, and they were saying, well, we're not allowed to have weapons here, and the park rangers are the only ones, and then they're never here. What are we going to do? And one of the things that these folks were doing is they had this big canister on their hip, and the canister contained bear repellent. I told them, you have a great weapon there. I mean, I would spray that outside in the hallway as you're escaping or as you're going into a safe room or something, and that'll discourage a person from coming forward. So you have to look at your environment, you have to look at the available resources, and you have to determine in your mind that if I ever get into a position where I'm going to have to fight, I'm going to take this chair leg and I'm going to hit them with it. I'm going to take this fire extinguisher, anything you can get your hands on that may be able to stop the person. Okay, so for running, have an escape route and plan in your mind. It's always better to have it in your mind because this way it's a fallback, it's muscle memory. You've remembered where you're going, you've walked it, you know this is what you're going to do. You know, like I said before, leave your belongings behind and keep your hands visible because the police can't distinguish between you and an active shooter, and the only distinguishing point is if they have a gun, if you have a gun in your hand. So if you're hiding your hands behind you or in your pockets, the police are going to think you may have the potential to be an active shooter. So don't give them any reason to stick with you any longer than you have to. Hide in an area that's out of the shooter's view. This is an important point. Human beings are predatory animals. Predatory animals are the ones that have their eyes in front of their heads. Prey animals have it on the side. Deer, horses, they're all prey animals. Dogs, lions, they're all predators. So one of the things that we've established throughout the millennia is we're sensitive. Our eyes are sensitive to movement. So as soon as something moves, and you can see this, if you're in a store and someone moves in your peripheral vision, you're going to look because that's just a natural instinct. It's a hunter's instinct. So stay out of the shooter's view. Lock your entry and lock the doors, and silence your cell phone and anything that beeps, chirps, buzzes, or rings. Shut it off. Leave it where you were. And then, as I said, as a last resort, when your life is in imminent danger, you have to fight. And your survival instincts will kick in, and you'll do what you have to do. But it's better to think this through and have it committed in your memory and understand that this is what I'm going to have to do to survive, to save myself, my parishioners, and my family. Then you're going to do it. An important thing important add to Run, Hide, Fight is Stop the Bleed. This comes from the American Council of Surgeons, and they go around and they teach folks how to apply tourniquets and how to apply pressure wounds to stop bleeding. Like as I said before, the police are not going to stop to help you until they've neutralized the shooter. So most people bleed out. Most people that die in these events that haven't been killed outright bleed out. So if you know how to apply a tourniquet to yourself, if you know how to apply a tourniquet or a pressure bandage to a fellow parishioner, and if you know how to take those steps, the chances for you to survive are much greater, much, much greater. And for organizational planning and response, this is an important thing because you have to be prepared for this, and preparation means the ability to manage this event. Obviously, you've seen the news stories. There's going to be media attention. There's going to be newspaper reporters. People are going to be taking videos of the event. Just this last active shooting event in New Zealand, the video, somebody took a video of it actually happening. It was on the internet for quite a while, so people could see what was going on. I don't think you want that as part of your legacy. So you want to try to control that as much as possible, and you want to get out in front of it as much as possible. So in crisis communication, you want to have a plan as part of your crisis management plan to have a spokesman ready to be able to give information out. Normally, the first couple of hours, you just tag along with the police and let them make the statements because they have jurisdiction, and it's a lot easier. But once you have control of it, you want to be able to control the message that goes out there, not someone else. And then duty of care standards. What are your requirements for duty of care in a active shooter situation? How do you assess that scenario, and how do you address it and manage it? Excuse me. And establish a program and training. The better trained people are in these events, the more likelihood and the greater the potential for survivability is. So advanced planning and preparation is pretty significant. And then again, the biggest aspect of active shooter training is a survival mindset. Train your people and talk about it and get it in your minds that you're going to survive any way you have to. You're going to run, you're going to hide, and if you have to, you're going to fight, and if you have to, you're going to save lives by applying tourniquets and pressure wounds. Okay, there are a lot of places and resources you can look for information on this. ASIS has standards. They help you establish policies, processes, and protocols to identify and prevent threatening behavior, assess and resolve threats and violence, and manage and resolve protocols. That's important because you see in newspaper articles after these types of events, people come out of the woodwork and say, I knew this was going to go bad. I saw him going bad. I noticed a change in behavior, but nobody says anything about it. What we have to do is establish a culture of identifying a problem and letting people know that it's okay to report on it because it's going to save lives. Now, start at the point of hire. Now, it's different for churches to do this, but adapt the point of hire to accepting and working with congregants. You can't do background checks, but you can identify and assess workplace violence hazards. You can have management commitment and worker participation. You can have hazard prevention and control. You can have the safety and health training. You can offer counseling if someone gets caught up in a bad situation at home or at work or something. And then keep record-keeping program evaluation. How are we doing? Is this working? Have people stepped up? Have we changed the culture? It's basically an exercise in change management to change the culture of people to say, okay, I see a problem, I'm not going to report it because he's been my friend for 20 years, or I see a problem and let me report it because he's been my friend for 20 years and I want to help him. And this is a polling question you may be able to take with your congregants or the folks that work with you, and take the temperature of how people feel about this. You know, you ask, if I'm concerned with the behavior of an individual in my workplace and believe they are a threat to themselves or others, I would report them to my supervisor, engage them directly, report them to human resources, call 911 or call in sick. I mean, this gives you a good idea of mindset, and mindset is what you have to change and what you have to influence for survivability. And again, leading behaviors. You have to recognize, everybody has to recognize that there could be problems. A lot of this is instinctual. Obviously, if someone's been a happy guy and a stable person and all of a sudden his attitude changes, we notice that. We have an inbred survivability capability and instinct. And don't push that to the side. If you don't feel comfortable, if you think there's a problem, don't push it to the side. Talk to someone and report it. For verbal or physical threats, domestic violence, being excluded from groups, obviously social media posts, you'd be surprised. If you look back on the folks that were involved in active shooter events, the people, and you look at their social media posts, you'll see guns, you'll see a whole change in attitude. It's such an indicator. And, as part of, if you're an employer, part of your employment contract should be the ability to look at social media posts under certain criteria. And then, working with close friends and workers and people talk and people say, oh, there's a problem here. But, you're not being a nosy body anymore. It's saving lives. I can't stress that enough. And then the pathway to violence indicators. You have the grievance. I'm really mad at this. I'm not happy here, or this person, disrespected me. Whatever the grievance is, whether real or perceived. And then the violent ideation. A lot of that comes from our social media, comes from TV, comes from movies. We're surrounded by violence. We're surrounded by violent games, violent movies, violent shows, and people start getting ideas. Yeah, I'm going to get even. Then there's research and planning. They may look at, because of the media attention that these events get, they may look at other shootings and try to pattern their way or learn from what happened there, what went wrong, what went right, according to the newspaper reports. And then once that point is done, they acquire the capabilities, type of weapons, rent a car, whatever they're going to use. Then they do their pre-attack preparation. They figure out when they're going to do it, how they're going to do it, what door they're going to walk in. If it's a school, they'll attack areas that are heavily populated, where there's an aggregation of people. And obviously, a congregation is a significant target. The probing and the breaching, the person may walk in with a gun 2 or 3 Sundays in a row and feel comfortable with walking in, and then there's the attack. So this is a long time coming. This is where most people get to the point where they can rationalize in their minds that it's okay to take a life. So you have a long time in trying to notice this and trying to mitigate it before it happens. And then the intervention. There's a lot of companies out there that will work with you to develop an intervention program. I'm sure there's one, right there with your congregation. There's a threat assessment using a uniform methodology, the evidence. And that goes back to writings, that goes back to social media, that goes back to Facebook posts, law enforcement and the courts, whether you use restraining orders or if there have been restraining orders in the past. Then you get to the intervention and counseling and the monitoring and the feedback. And those 3 are important, because if you get to the point where you see something and you can intervene and offer counseling, then you've just saved a lot of lives. And I keep stressing this, I keep repeating this, but it's a critical part of an active shooter prevention plan. You know, really, when the event happens, if you haven't done anything to it to prepare for it, it's going to be pretty bad. The only thing that has been shown to work is an armed presence. So you can take steps to do this on an individual basis and try to make everybody aware of what's going on and train people to get ready, or you can hire somebody with firearms experience and really someone with tactical experience so that they can neutralize the threat as quickly as possible. And then the crisis management planning. You have the plan and the scope, the response and structure teams. You have the escalation and screening. You know, how do you, if someone makes a threat in the church or at one of your parishioners, how do you handle that? How do you screen it? You have your concept of operations on how you're going to work. You're going to have your crisis communications, which is important because you want to get out in front of those tweets and the news media, et cetera. Humanitarian assistance, that's critical right at the point of neutralization of the attack. That's long-term and short-term medical needs as well as mental health needs. And then the continuity of operations. You know, when you have an active shooter event, okay, it happens, but now you have to think about what do I need to do to get back in business, to get back to normalcy? How am I going to clean up the biological debris? How am I going to patch and paint? You know, am I going to lose any parishioners because they don't want to come back to this church because it happened? I mean, there's a lot of things that you have to talk through and think through on a situational basis, on a scenario-based concept to get ready for this type of event. And then I apologize, this isn't really skipping around, but it's the life cycle of the event. You have the event, you have the police, the law enforcement, you have the counseling, you have the response, you have the medical treatment, and then all the way to the 1 year anniversary. These are all considerations that should be thought of, and I say have to if you're going to take a proactive approach to this and you know, make the commitment. It doesn't take a lot of money to do this. It's basically planning and thinking through the situation with the folks that are going to be involved, but it's so critically important to your operation. You don't want to be doing this right after this happens. Any questions?
All right. So for everyone on the line, if you can type your questions into the attendee chat, we'll give you a few minutes to type those in, and then I will read them to Lou, and we'll go from there. In the meantime, we've had some questions about concealed carry and weapons in church. Your thoughts on concealed carry and, you know, parishioners being armed? We generally say, you know, it's best not to, just because when a cop shows up, he's not going to know the difference between an active shooter and a congregant who's trying to act as a good Samaritan. But I kind of was curious as to your thoughts.
It's a tough situation. I'm not sure what the laws are where you are. That's the number one consideration. The second consideration is obviously, as you said, coordinating with the police. How fast are they going to get there? I mean, if you're in a rural area and it's 20 minutes before the police can respond, you know, that's a decision you guys are going to make. But you know, you have to consider where the resources are, how fast you can do this, because remember, this person is planning this over a long period of time. So if they're using a firearm, they've got normally there's quite a loadout associated with these attacks. And the only way to stop it is through, you know, a similar use of force. And again, if the police can't get there in 20 minutes, I know what I would do. I was with a pretty high level unit in the Navy. I'm very well trained with firearms, so you know. And if you feel you have to do this, get the training. You know, or work with parishioners that are ex-military, and maybe, you know, you may have them as quasi-security guards, and everybody knows, the police know that they're the ones with a firearm. One of my clients is a big arena, and they encourage police to come into games off duty and carry off duty. However, they do identify these policemen with a red band on their shooting hand. So when the police come in, everybody understands that anybody with a gun with a red wristband is a police officer.
Yeah. Okay. First question I have is, what research has shown that the only effective deterrent is armed presence?
It's the stories. You have a perfect example is the congressional baseball game. You know, you just have to look back and let me get back to the congressional baseball game. There was an active shooter at a congressional baseball game practice. He started shooting. 4 people were shot. Nobody was killed, and they were able to neutralize it. In one of the high schools, I think it was Great Falls, they had a resource officer. He heard the shooting. He went and engaged the assailant, and he was able to neutralize the shooter. If there's no armed presence there, no one's going to stop them. The research is just going through each individual event and looking to see. And it doesn't have to be armed. I mean, there was one high school football teacher who took it on himself to attack the active shooter with basketballs. He threw 2 or 3 basketballs at the guy. He took 2 rounds, I believe, but he was able to subdue the person. But it's just a matter of going back and looking at each event and saying what worked and what didn't.
Okay. Well, that was the only question we have. I'll give another minute or so here for people to type their questions, and otherwise we'll give everybody a little bit of extra time this afternoon. In the meantime, I want to thank Lou for joining us today. A lot of great information. And if any of you have any further questions, you can contact the insurance board, or you can email me at gsink, SINK, @insuranceboard.org. Oh, there we go. Another question. You mentioned not meeting at the muster point.
Yeah, in a couple of instances that weren't active shooter events, but were classified as domestic violence, husband and wife, and I've read about 2 of these. Pretty sure there are a couple of others. Husband and wife issues. They both worked at the same plant. The husband knew where to muster for fire, so he pulled the fire alarm. People went to the mustering point and they shot it up. So, you know, as you develop your plan, you know, you develop an accountability capability. Call into a conference phone. You know, access a website, however you want to do it, and say, I'm safe. This is, you know, Lou Barani, I'm safe with my family. And, you know, get accountability for, you know, to try to find out where everyone is in this confusion.
Okay. Next question. We have a congregation who has a person who has some emotional issues and has accused the pastor congregation of a misconduct. She has a history of domestic violence. We are trying to work through the process of reviewing her accusations, but she's showing up at church, speaking out on Facebook, and leadership is afraid she will show up and be violent. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, the best thing I can do is if you're going through your process of evaluation, I would alert the police about it so that they can do a check and see if she has any available firearms, and, you know, work with them on a process to move forward. You know, just make sure you have, you know, as a congregation, as an organization, you have your ducks in a row and say, this is our process for evaluation. This is the evidence we have. We're coming to you now because we think we're at a dangerous point.
Okay. Next question. As a follow-up to the muster point, where would you meet up in those instances? As
I said, me personally, I'd run as far as I could. because
Okay.
it's pretty hard to outrun a bullet. And again, develop some kind of accountability capability, whether you do it through a cell phone, whether you do it on a website, whether you call into a board, but just have some form of accountability where you can find everybody.
Okay. Next question. If we allow someone to have a gun on our premise, wrong question. So, where do I find, where can the staff get training?
There's a lot of places that have it. You can go online and download Run, Hide, Fight. DHS has a ton of very, very good resources to get the ball rolling. And then there are companies that come out. We do some training in this, so we might be able to help you out there.
Okay. If a congregant brings a firearm, is it a good idea for them to notify the pastor that they are carrying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If anybody's carrying, you should understand that. The same way an arena, I know you're not going to have detectors out there and wands checking for metal and guns and stuff, but it's good information to have. And if he's carrying, and the pastor may want to talk to him about an active shooter situation, what would you do? Because everybody's going to look to the pastor to figure out a way out of this. First gunshot, they're going to look at the pastor, then they're going to say, okay, I got to get out of here. So what would that person do? What would he want to do? Is he willing to take the risk to engage the shooter?
Okay. Next question. Our small church has been working with the local police to determine potential risk. They have suggested establishment of a team to address any active shooter situation. Are there training resources available for this?
Yes. As I said, DHS has you go to their active shooter site on their website, and they have tremendous resources. They have a lot of links to a lot of different resources for training, for evaluation, anything up to and including the memorial. So that's a great resource, and we can help you with that as well.
All right. Is it common for staff to carry pepper spray?
Some people do. I don't know how common it is. I haven't really taken a benchmark study on that. But if you have nothing else, that's your weapon.
Right. One thing I know on that is, go ahead.
Go ahead. Just remember that you have to get pretty close.
Yeah. One thing I was going to say on that is I know people have been recommending pepper gel instead of the sprays because the gel is more targeted and doesn't, get it into the air as much. So bystanders won't be impacted by gel versus spray.
As long as they practice with it, because you don't want to have a can of pepper spray in your pocketbook and the first time you use it is the first time you're engaging an attacker. So know how it sprays. Go, use it a couple of times. See how far the spray goes. See, it doesn't come out in an aerosol. It comes out in a spray. So.
Right. Okay. One person is asking what DHS is. That's Department of Homeland Security. They have a website. There's also a website called ready.gov that has several resources for active shooter. Wanted to let everyone know that.
Ready.gov is part of DHS. There's links that go from DHS to ready.gov, so that'll take you right along.
In a random shooter situation, the best plan of action after it starts?
Just survivability. Get out as quick as you can. If you have your family there, get them out. Grab them. Have full accountability. It's not a bad idea to, if you have a family and say, if this ever happens, this is what I want you to do. Don't look back. Don't wait for me. Just go. Okay.
should backpacks be required to be left in the car? And then as a corollary to that, should a church develop a backpack policy?
Well, you need a backpack policy to leave it in the car because most people do carry them. But I would say leave it. You know, at that point, if you see somebody coming in, if you have a backpack policy and everybody, you know, subscribes to that, and you see somebody coming in with a backpack, you know, that's maybe an indicator, and that's someone you want the pastor to go up to and say, hey, how you doing? We have a policy. Please leave that in your car.
Okay.
You know, you're only there for an hour or so. You don't need to bring a backpack in there. It's not like you're going there and going to church for 8 hours.
Right. Okay. We had a question about coverage. Could that person please email me? I sent you a private message, but I don't know if it went through. gsync@insuranceboard.org. Next question. Is a pastor liable if they are aware of a person carrying a firearm who accidentally shoots an innocent person? I don't really want to get into coverage questions. That sounds like something that's more for an attorney.
Yes.
I'll give a few more minutes here. All right. What if the backpack is on a homeless person and they say it has all of their belongings?
How many homeless people attend church?
There are a lot, especially if you're in more of an urban area. Yeah.
Okay.
Either church or they go in for church, church service, other services as well.
Okay. Then I would set up a cubicle outside where they can leave their backpack, or in the vestibule or something.
Okay. They're still trickling in a little bit here. We'll give it another minute or so.
Okay.
What about children in training?
You have to make them aware of it. I mean, they're going to, as I said before, you know, take your family aside, talk to them about the possibility. I can almost say with assurance that there isn't a single child that goes to school that hasn't heard of active shooter or hasn't been trained in school about it. What you're doing is you're transferring that knowledge to a church environment.
Okay. Another question about coverage. For any coverage questions, I'm not going to address those on here. Please email either me or your agent. One comment says, I would encourage churches to train their frontline people, ushers, deacons, greeters, staff to get trained in medical first aid. I agree with that.
Absolutely.
And then,
and have the resources available. Get trauma kits, get tourniquets, get pressure bandages. You know, one of the things, if you take a look at images from Mandalay Bay, if you take a look at images from the Boston Marathon bombing, you're going to see a lot of guys standing around without shirts on. And they're basically veterans that took off their shirts to make improvised tourniquets.
Yeah. An ancillary to that, same person was, it's very helpful to learn how to interact and talk with people with mental health issues. I agree with that as well. Are there examples of active shooter policies available for reference?
DHS has them, ready.gov has them, and there are a number of resources on the internet. If you need more direction than that, you know, I can help, or AIG can help.
I can as well. The IB has some resources there as well, so please feel free to email me.
You there?
Yeah, I'm looking at, here we go. Uh, So for anybody asking if this presentation will be available, we'll be posting a recording of this on our website probably by Monday. So it will be available for view again. I think, oh, here we go. Should church members be told the place to meet after a shooting? Do they talk to media?
No, and that's part of your crisis communication plan. You know, you should get your congregation together and take 5 minutes during a sermon or, just afterwards and just, talk to the congregation and say, hey, we're thinking about this problem. It's not an issue that we're insensitive with. We're thinking through policies. We're thinking through consequence management, and we'll be sharing that with our parishioners as we develop it. And then create a learning. I don't know how people feel about, staying a half an hour or 15 minutes after to get some training, but that's something you can absolutely do.
Yeah, and I think it's important as a part of any plan, crisis plan, or any plan in general that relates to this or a fire or any sort of emergency situation for the church to have one person that's appointed as the communications person. That way, all the messages are the same. You just direct media or whoever to the communications person.
Exactly, and during the event, that person coordinates with the police department that stands right there when all the microphones are in front. All you have to say is, we're working with the police on this. We'll have a comment, later on when we have more information. And that'll take you out a couple of days. It'll give you a chance to really, wrap your hands around this.
Next question. Should I appoint people who assist the elderly in escape?
Yes, absolutely. Again, thinking through this as a scenario, if you have, maybe the deacons and the ushers, if you know that there are elderly people there, try to get them to sit in the same place so that the deacons can come in and the ushers can come in and get them out. That's keep them near a door. Because people you have to think about their safety, because people are going to be in a panic. And there's a lot of times when people in panic do something they wouldn't normally do under normal circumstances. So they may just push past an elderly person because the fear of getting shot is so strong. It's just survival, and they have tunnel vision, and it goes down to almost 2 inches, and all they see is the door, nothing else around them.
Right. And I've seen some comments now around, graying population where having a lockdown location set up for the elderly in a congregation might be an effective alternative as well.
Well, you have to think that one through, because these attacks don't take that long.
Right.
And, if you can get the elderly out, that's a big deal, because number one, it gets them out. Number two, it doesn't slow down the others from getting out as well. Locking someone down in the basement of a church or in the vestibule, or in the sacristy, you have to think this through. What if the person comes through that door? You're not going to go that way. You're going to go the opposite way. But you have to think this through in a scenario situation and say, well, if this person came, if the assailant came in through here, this is what we would do as a church pastor, the deacons and the ushers, and this is what we would do as a congregation.
Okay. What if the elderly person has dementia and does not move quickly, and lives would be caused? Multiple lives would be caused.
Pick them up.
There you go.
If they're older, they're not going to be that heavy. And believe me, you'll find the strength for it.
Okay. Let's see. Give it a few more minutes here.
You know, if you take three things out of this, it's preparation, it's response, and then it's management of the event. Those are the three most important things to frame this around.
Right. And one thing that I've been telling people when I address this is a lot of the guts of whatever your plan that you put together probably exist in fire escape plans and otherwise. So the thought has been started. It's just manipulating what you have to meet this situation as well.
Yeah, you have evacuations. You have evacuation plans with the fire department. You know, again, the best place to start is with the police department, so you understand what they're going to do and how they're going to react, and then you can plan an actual physical evacuation around that. They may have different ideas. You know, I can't speak for the tactical capability of every police department, so they may have a tactical framework that I didn't think of, I haven't been exposed to, but this is what they do. So, you know, you're going to have to work within that framework. And again, if they're 20 minutes away, you're going to have to work within that framework as well.
All right. I think that wraps up all the questions. If anyone on the webinar has further questions, please feel free to reach out. Again, it's gsync@insuranceboard.org. I want to thank Lou for his time today. I think this was a very informative and helpful conversation.
My pleasure. If there's anything I can do to help, just reach me through Gerald.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Lou.
Thank you.